So, what did you do for the investigation that we're here for?
As part of that investigation, the conduct was on duty, and because of that, I utilized the TrackStar GPS system that the police department has and had in place then to determine whether conduct took place that was inappropriate.
Okay. And what is TrackStar?
And just so that we're clear without getting into explicit detail, I assume we're talking about conduct that was inappropriate. The GPS was not related to the domestic violence stalking allegations, but something else. Or am I wrong about that?
No, it was related to that, and then he fell into this other information as to why we're here today.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So what is TrackStar?
TrackStar is the name of the brand or the company that sells to agencies GPS tracking systems that go in the police cars.
Okay. And so TrackStar allows you to find out where officers are.
In real time and go back in the past.
Okay. And who did you work with to determine the GPS information that you were after?
The Eliot Police Department used then in 2009, and still does, I believe, we utilized the Eliot Police, the Cady Police Department for dispatching, and that's where the servers for the computer systems are. So the TrackStar system for Eliot is joined in with Kittery's, and there's one particular police sergeant that I worked with there that was in charge of their IT system. So I went to him to elicit his data.
Okay. And who is that?
It was then Sergeant, now retired, Charles Denon.
Okay. And as a result of your working with Charles Denault, what did you learn?
I learned that the information I was looking for was obtained. But what I wanted to do was try to confirm that the data that he was giving me was actually fact. And I wanted to follow up to be able to show that this information that we have is true.
And when you say the data, like where the car was at a specific time?
Correct.
All right. And so how did you go about verifying that data?
Well, I instituted what's called special attention checks. So if someone in
I'm going to object around this point. I think we're getting past the point of talking about whether the document exists. I think it's sufficient foundation has been laid to talk about generally what the allegations contained in the report are and how we should move to type this report. I gave to somebody, and that's what we're going to talk about then, whether it exists.
What is the special attention check? What does that mean?
Your Honor, that's when someone goes on vacation, so they notify the police department they're leaving their home vacant for a period of time, and they want the police department to keep an eye on their house.
So you ordered
Oh,
officers.
sorry. Hold on a second. My objection's still pending. Again, we're getting into the content of what this report contains. The court's order prohibits that at this point. We're just talking about whether it exists or not and what was done with it. I think I allowed Mr. Cady to talk a little bit about his investigation, and now we need to move to.
Well, I mean, to some extent, the details of the report and the details of the investigation would seem to me to be relevant with respect to the level of care, the level of attention, the level of the ability to make sure that a record has been appropriately maintained. I mean, it seems to me there's some relationship between the level of investigation and the care with which that information has been stored or otherwise archived. So to the extent that we're not talking about the identity of particular officers here, some information regarding the significance of the information and accordingly the amount of care that would have been given to archive it or otherwise keep track of it seems to be a relevant consideration.
And that's not what this witness is testifying about. This witness is testifying about the content of the report. What the court's talking about is, I took these steps without talking about content, to prepare the report and then store it. We haven't heard any of that testimony. That's what the court is here to hear today, is the storage, where it went, who I gave it to.
And what I'm suggesting to you, Mr. Michio, is that if the issue is, did somebody not report their lunch receipts, that might be a record that is treated with a different level of care than a record which indicates somebody perjured themselves before the grand jury. These are hypothetical scenarios that have nothing to do with this case. I'm just suggesting that the level of care you deal with one particular allegation might be different than the level of care you deal with the other. So to the extent that there's some relatively generic information about the quality of the report, if we're not talking about specific officers' names, I think there's some relevance to that issue. The objection's noted. Thank you. Go ahead.
So if I understand correctly, officers were assigned specific tasks. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
All right. And who were they assigned those tasks by?
By me.
Okay. And how did you know that those tasks were completed?
I required that each officer submit a daily activity sheet, and that was to be noted on the daily activity sheet.
Did they sign those?
Yes.
Okay. And were they submitted to, where were they submitted?
They would be submitted to me daily.
And were they kept in the normal course of business?
They were kept in my office environment.
So with that as a context, how does that play into the data that you were trying to retrieve from the GPS system?
Well, in trying to determine the best possible way to see whether this system works, I knew that if I went to that activity sheet, I would be able to tell through the TrackStar system that on a particular day, that officer who tells me that he checked a vacation home for special attention actually did that. And it was done so I could confirm that that system was working properly.
And what happened? What was revealed when you did that sort of verification process?
That 4 out of the 6
This point. Now we're getting into specifics of the report. Lay proper foundation for how the information is stored, the level of care in which it was stored. Now we want to talk about the actual report that was generated and verified. That's the purpose again of the hearing, is whether this report is in possession of the Eliot Police Department.
Your Honor, I concur in the objection. The issue before the court is whether this document exists, and to some degree providing town of Eliot with enough information so that it knows what the document is and where it was found, and who it was provided to, and what form it was provided to, so that the town of Eliot can go back and try to locate the document at hand. The contents of the document, how it was, is not relevant and is not an issue. We've covered enough so the town of Eliot has an idea about what the contents is, and that is enough for us to know. And from there on, we're just looking for issues of who prepared it, when it was supplied, and to whom it was supplied, in what format, length of the document, and those kind of issues.
Judge, I think this is very relevant. I mean, this sets the stage for, where it went and why it was important and how it was hacked. So I think that this piece of it, I mean, to be doing this piecemeal, Your Honor, is...
Well, in terms of the objection, the specific question that you asked Attorney Fairfield was what?
What did the verification process of checking the activity logs with the GPS system, what did that reveal?
And given that we're not talking about the identity, at this point in time, the identity of any particular officer, why is that not important?
It has nothing to do with the preparation, storage of the document that is in question. This report, the defendant alleged exists. It doesn't matter what it says, it's certainly for today's purposes. For today's purposes, we're determining whether it exists and whether Eliot has it. Not even that, whether it exists based on these officers' testimony. The content is irrelevant to that determination. We've gone through the general, here's what we're talking about. At this point, you move to where you typed it, who you gave it to, where was it stored, your expectation.
Right, and as the court's already indicated, whether or not the information contained in the report is of a trivial nature or of a significant nature is a relevant issue with respect to the level of care in which it was stored. The objection is noted and overruled. Go ahead.
What was revealed as a result of this verification process?
The 4 of the 6 officers assigned to the checks were substantially not making the checks, even though the documents reported that they had.
So they were essentially signing off on activity logs saying they had done things, but they hadn't.
Correct.
And did you do further verification to determine that the GPS was working correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do?
Through retired Sergeant General, we established a process where we could put a police cruiser in a certain location and determine that it would show up
Okay.
on that.
All right. Do you know what a geofence is?
I do.
Okay. And was that something you utilized?
Well, I didn't.
Actually, look at that one.
Well, I mean, as a practical matter, I think we have an idea that this is significant information at this point in time. So now the issue is what happens with that significant information in terms of this phase of our hearing.
Now, Detective, I'm sorry, Mr. Cady, what did you do when you learned that information?
What I did is I took all of the activity sheets that I had possession of and matched them up with the TrackStar GPS data to show that on this day, a particular officer said he or she was checking the vacation home, and the TrackStar would match up with it to show that it didn't take place, or it did take place. And that was the content of my investigation.
Okay. And did you write a report?
I put together a report, yes.
Okay. And did you show that report to anybody?
I did.
All right, define for me what writing a report means.
Essentially, all of the data, if the report were showed to you today, Your Honor, you would be able to follow the sequence of the investigation.
What I'm asking of the logistics associated with that, is this something you write out on a yellow piece of paper? Is this something that's on a computer screen? Is this something that's on your personal computer? The details, that's what I'm interested in at this point in the hearing, which is how did you memorialize the report, whatever that means? Go ahead.
It is in paper form, Your Honor, and held together with a binder.
Okay. And did you attach any of the documents that you referred to, the GPS and the activity logs?
Yes.
And then what did you do with that report?
I discussed its contents with then Detective Kevin Curran and ultimately with the chief.
Okay. And did you express concern to the chief?
I did.
Just so we're clear on the record, who is the chief?
Chief Shore.
Well, there's been representations regarding Chief Short in this case. I just want to make sure that there's not more than one police chief, whether or not there's a change in tenure, any of that kind of stuff, that we're all talking about the same people.
Okay. So, did you always work with Chief Short?
Yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, is he still the chief of Pelham?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you said that you expressed concern to Chief Short, correct?
Correct.
Did you suggest a course of action?
I did.
Okay. And what was your suggestion to the
No
chief?
objection, all right, and now we're into content. It's talked about a report that exists, it's described as paper and a binder. I don't think we've got to the point where he actually gave the report to anybody, but discussions with Chief Short are not the purview of this hearing. Yeah, it's just about whether the document exists.
Well, we've got a representation from the state. My guy's been in custody for 29 months. I've asked for this material again and again. The chief has written a letter saying it doesn't exist. It's been represented here
I
today.
mean, here's the problem with this, is that if the issue is, what's the course of action we should do with this? If the answer to the question is, this should be placed in a secure file and we should make sure that we never lose this piece of paper, that's a relevant issue with respect to today's proceeding. If the issue is, I think we should place letters of reprimand in people's personnel files, then that's an issue that these folks have an opportunity to chime in on with respect to whether or not the privacy rights of the officers here are outweighed by the Brady and Giglio issues. So that the objection sustained with respect to the idea that the question presents a variety of different responses, some of which are relevant to today's proceedings and some of which are not.
You presented to the chief, you expressed concern. What was his response?
He told me that,
Sorry, I'm not objecting yet. It's the same objection. It's whether this report exists. That's what we're talking about. That's it. That's the purpose of today's hearing. The chief saying anything in response is not relevant to that. It's not within the purview of the court today.
Well, I mean, what if hypothetically the response to the question is, A, let's memorialize this and make sure we don't lose it, or hypothetically B, it's time to take a match to this. I mean, that's arguably responsive answers to the question, both of which are relevant for today's proceedings. So in terms of the question, once again, Attorney Fairfield, what was the question?
What was Chief Short's response when you brought this to his attention?
With respect to that, the objection is sustained to the extent that the question relates to what any response about what should happen, physically happen to the report, or whether or not there should be action physically taken with respect to the report. That's an appropriate issue for today.
I think, what was the chief's response?
Again, to
Do you understand our debate here?
I think so.
I mean, to the extent that the issue with the chief relates to what should happen to the report physically, or whether that's an appropriate response on the issue of whether or not the report actually existed or continues to exist. To the extent that there's any discussion other than that, that's likely an issue for another day, once we can have the personnel file type issues discussed in more detail. If you can answer the question, go ahead. If you can't, that's fine too.
How about his willingness to just dismiss it and chastise his deputy chief?
I'm sorry. Oh, okay, now,
Well,
if the reason we're here is to talk about the production of the document. The Attorney Fairfield just spouting about what some chief said is inappropriate in its entirety. This witness is here to testify. She is not. We're here to talk about whether this document exists. If Mr. Cady can say, I gave it to the chief and he threw it in the trash bin, that's what happened to a physical report. That's what we're here to talk about. I objected 3 times. In the court, we had a specific ruling about that. The attorney then talking about what the chief said is entirely inappropriate.
Well, if the response of the chief was, this is ridiculous, why did you bring this to my attention? And the issue that's presented to the court is a claim by the town of Eliot that this report did not exist, that seems to me to be a fairly relevant piece of information.
I'm not disagreeing with the court in a later hearing. The court's ruling today was whether this exists. If Mr. Cady's in the chief's office and she's tossing the trash can, that's relevant information for today. That's what we're talking about, where the physical report is. That's what we're talking about.
The objection is overruled. Go ahead.
What was the chief's response?
He told me that I opened a can of worms.
And to your knowledge, did he take any further action?
No.
That report that you crafted, was it specific?
understand the question, what
Okay.
sense?
Could you understand from that report what had transpired with these officers?
Yes.
How long after that did you depart Eliot PD?
About 9 months.
About 9 months after.
Well, the, 14 months.
All right. And did you have specific conversations with then Lieutenant Curran about?
Yeah, you're talking about the physical report.
Cool.
A discussion with Lieutenant Curran or Mr. Curran 9 months later, I don't think is relevant.
Well, I'm asking during that time, because I think this report is missing, so I think it's relevant to kind of track who knew where it was and when.
Well, is Officer Kern, is it still Officer Kern?
No,
Is Mr. Kern here to testify today?
he is.
And the objection is sustained.
When you left Eliot Police Department, where was that report?
It was in the filing cabinet in my office or the lieutenant's office.
And
Okay, wait a second. Filing cabinet in your office, and then you said the lieutenant's office?
Which is the lieutenant's office, or whoever's sitting in that position, Your Honor. It was in the second drawer out of three.
Let me just take a step back, Mr. Cady. All right, I had you down while you were Elliot as being the deputy chief and the lieutenant.
The rank is lieutenant, it's the second in command, so it's Lieutenant Kevin Cady, deputy chief of police.
So was that your office that the testimony relates to in terms of the file cabinet?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
are you here by way of subpoena today?
Uh,
Are you here by way of subpoena today?
I am under subpoena, yes.
That investigation that you did, approximately how long did it take you to do that investigation?
Approximately a week.
And was there significant papers involved in that report?
I would estimate it to be between 60 and 80 pages.
Thank you, I don't have anything further.
One second first.
Of course, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
You stated, Mr. Cady, you were with the Eliot Police Department from October of 2008 to June of 2010, correct?
I will correct that, July,
July.
End of June.
But the October 2008 is the correct start time?
I believe so, yes.
The last portion of that, you were not on active duty, correct?
I was not, no.
You were on short-term disability?
I was on, out on sick leave, yes.
What date did you discuss this report with Chief Short?
I have to approximate it because it was 5 years ago, somewhere around mid-April 2009.
When did you discuss this report with then Officer Curran?
There were more than one discussion with him about it. Many discussions about it.
And And that was prior to your discussion with Chief Short?
It was prior to and after.
So prior to what you have identified as a mid-April meeting with Chief Short, how many times did you speak with Officer Curran about that?
Several.
I guess what I'm getting at is, are we talking years of discussions with Lieutenant Curran, with Mr. Curran, Officer
Objection.
Curran?
Why is this relevant? I really don't understand its relevance.
Again, this goes to the how this report was prepared. And so far, we've identified a single meeting with Chief Short in mid-April of 2009. This witness has testified that we discussed this report with Officer Curran prior to that. I'm trying to identify specifically when those discussions took place, over what period of time before the meeting with Chief Short.
To what end? I mean, is this,
Well, I mean, if the issue relates to what was being said, then the objection is appropriate. To the extent that the issue relates to whether or not this was a topic of discussion, it seems as if the allegation being made here is a significant one, and it would seem to be the type of allegation that, if actually made, would tend to be the topic of conversation between law enforcement officers working at the LAPD. So, to the extent that the issue relates to the frequency of conversation, that's appropriate. The details of the conversation, the objection is the same.
And that was my sole concern, was the frequency of those conversations with Officer Curran prior to the April 2009 meeting with Chief Short.
Sorry, is that a question?
Yes, it was. How many times did you talk with Officer Curran prior to your meeting in April 2009 with Chief Short about these allegations? Just how many, not what was said?
I said several. It was a long time ago.
And my clarifying question is, are we talking, I use these as examples, 100 meetings or 2 meetings?
this is asking the answer.
It hasn't been answered.
That's overruled.
I'd have to guess, maybe 5 or 6 times.
And what time frame leading up to your meeting with Chief Short did those take place? Within the week proceeding, the month proceeding?
I would say throughout the time period where I identified that there was a potential internal affairs issue.
And when was that identification specifically made?
Well, it's sometime end of March to mid-May, mid-April,
And again, that's in 2009?
2009.
So what you're telling me is the entire process that you just went through on your direct about putting together this report is a 2-month process at the outside, March to April 2009?
No, I testified that it probably took me a week to put together the documents, the documentation.
Right, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to belabor the point, I just want to be clear. At some point in time, you have the suspicion that these things are going on, and there's a process to getting to your meeting with Chief Short, including the week you've identified